right, so welcome and thank you very much for joining us today. We are absolutely delighted that you've taken out this time on a Sunday morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time it happens to be for you. Thank you for joining. My name is Roshni Sharma and I'm part of the FIG Young Surveyors Network. I'm also the chair of the SSI Young Professionals here in Australia, where I am today. Joining me today, I have Dr. Corbina, who is joining all the way from Germany, and he is the current Surveyors Network chair. I'd like to pass over to Corbina now, who will walk us through an introduction to welcome you all to today's conference. Over to you, KB.
Thank you very much, Roshni. I'm very glad to be with the Asia and the Pacific network of the FIG Young Surveyors Network today. Good day and good evening, everyone. So welcome to the Asia and the Pacific session of the 6th FIG Young Surveyors Conference. To kick start, I will just go through a little bit of what the Young Surveyors Network is about, who is a young surveyor, and then introduce this session and then hand back to Roshni for the keynote. So for this conference, a lot of things have gone into the organizing of the conference, changing of the venue, or even the form of the conference itself. And it's of course because of the COVID pandemic that has ravaged the world over the past 2 years. And thankfully, the Netherlands decided to host the conference this year after the LOC in Ghana gracefully handed it over to the Netherlands after able to host it in person in 2020. So this conference is being hosted online by the Netherlands. So for the people who have been part of this, who are part of this session, just by way of introduction, I am Kwabena Obiensiama, as Roshni mentioned. You can call me KB. And I'm originally from Ghana, but I'm currently living in Germany, and I'm a lecturer at the Leibniz University of Hanover. And we also have Farah Koksal, who is a senior community lead at Here Technologies. Then finally, we have Roshni Sharma, the chair of SSI Young Professionals, as well as a project manager and analyst at Frontier SI. So quickly, who is a young surveyor? So talking about who a young surveyor is, the basic aspect of it is a person who is below the age of 35. That's the first thing, below the age of 35. And further from that, we have two classes. We have the students, and then we have the young surveying professionals. And then the student is any student below the age of 35 first, who is a student of a surveying or related discipline. Then we also have the path of the young professionals, which is a person below the age of 35 and within 10 years of graduation of their bachelor or master's degree, and a professional of a surveying or related discipline. So if you do fit in any of these criteria, then of course you are very much welcome to become active in the Young Surveyors Network. In fact, we are entreating you to become active in the Young Surveyors Network. So, but then how do you become active then? To become active in Young Surveyors Network, there's no formal process to be a young surveyor. So we just encourage everyone who fits the definition that I just gave to become active in our network. And to become active, you can just first and foremost get into contact with your National Surveying Association. So in this case, for example, if you're in Australia, you can contact Roshni Sharma, who is the chair of the SSI Young Professionals. And then further from that, you can also join one of our numerous social media channels in order to get updated with what we do as we do it. And it's also through there that we put out calls to volunteer for the network. And then last but not the least, You can also send us an email via email address fig.youngsurveyors@gmail.com with your ideas, and also let us know who you are. So we also have regional networks within which you can become active, and the network which you're in over here is the Asia and the Pacific network. There are 4 other networks: the African network, the European network, the South American network, and the North American network. And for this conference also, it was organized in sessions according to these networks. And so we had the African and the European network having its session this earlier today, and then the South American network having a Spanish-speaking session. Then about 4 hours ago, the North American network session just ended there. So let's go on to talk about the Asia and the Pacific network. The Asia and the Pacific network is frankly one of the most or the most diverse network, regional network in YSN, and it's always very exciting to join a meeting with the network. The second meeting of the network was in 2018, which was in Tokyo, but then the first one was in 2014 in Malaysia, and it was quite an exciting time for Young Surveyors then. The last in the Asia and the Pacific network region, was in Hanoi in 2019 on the sidelines of the 2019 FIG working week, and it was quite an exciting time. So I cannot wait for us to be able to meet in person again so that we can meet you all and shake your hands and network better. So to move on to the next session, I'll just invite Roshni back. Thank you very much, everyone.
Hello, everyone again. So this morning, we are terribly excited to have 3 incredible keynotes here presenting with us. So we will start off with Dr. Bala. Bala, I apologize, I'm really bad with last names, but Bala works at the City Futures Research Centre at the University of New South Wales as a postdoctoral fellow. And today he will be speaking with us about using real-time dashboards to monitor the impact of disruptive events on real estate markets. So we will look at COVID-19 as a case study in Australia. Then we'll have Professor Alan Duffy, who is Director of the Space... Sorry, 1 second. So Alan Duffy is the Director of the Space Technology Industry Institute at Swinburne University of Technology, and he will be speaking with us today about space and spatial opportunities and challenges. And then we'll have our final keynote, Priya Gandhi, who works at Atelier 10 as a building sustainability engineer, and she'll speak to us about how climate change will change the way that we plan our cities and buildings. And we've had the bushfires in Australia, and we are currently in the midst of a massive and devastating COVID-19 pandemic, and climate change is going to be the next, or is already one of the next big disruptors to the way that we work in the geospatial and surveying industry. Perfect.
So to introduce myself, I'm Bala. So I'm working with University of New South Wales with City Futures Research Centre, a centre which focuses on cities and research relating to cities in particular. So today, I'm going to be giving a background of the project which I work in, which is Value Australia. It's a cooperative research centre project. And it's looking at valuation of properties across Australia. And I'll give a background for the project, then go on to see set a context for property market and dashboards and how we are going to use that, use dashboards in monitoring and observing property markets in Australia. So basically, to give a background for the project, Value Australia is one of the biggest research projects in looking at a property market in Australia. So it's a national level project in which we are planning to create a scalable, efficient, automated valuation model for properties across Australia. So it is a federal government funded project. It's funded. We are collaboratively working with Frontier SI, Commonwealth Bank, and government agencies such as Property New South Wales and Value General, etc. This is an extension of a previous project which we delivered, which is called RACE. It's a rapid analytics on Scenario Explorer. So where like we kind of built a smaller, like a proof of concept for New South Wales, where like people could actually like do scenario exploration of like how property markets are affected by scenario planning tools such as like introduction of train stations, bus stops, etc. So that project went really well. So the proof of concept was very well received, and Value Australia project kind of expands that to the national level. We are working on a number of things within the project. So for example, like in the RACE project, we have like a lot of ordinary least square models to value a property and like create models in, and then like we're kind of like looking to expand that into like applying machine learning models to improve them, and also looking at like sub models which takes into account like a lot of properties characteristics as well, such as slope, shape, and what are the kind of views the property have, etc. We are also looking at like disseminating what we achieve in research through dashboards and like public facing project as well. So today I'm going to talk about one such aspect, which is like the dashboard part of it, right? So to begin with, like early in 2020, last year, March, we had the initial questions coming up the project saying like, okay, there is a huge event happening right now. So Australia is facing this huge pandemic, like, and the borders were shut down, and like people were like looking at like how is this going to affect our property market, right? So there were like three factors involved. One is like the disruption itself, and then we have like a real estate market we want to know the impact of, and also like the city dashboards, which we are like as urban management and urban planners, we have a lot of experience in creating with. So in terms of real estate market, like it's very, very complex, right? So usually people think like as a market is a very simple mechanism, but like real estate in particular is very complex. It's complex internally. It's very significant in Australia, particularly because it covers like almost 50% of everything we do. And it's complex internally in terms of number of people there, how the assets are like traded there. And it's also complex externally because it affects everything else in the country as well. And recently in the last 5 years, it's been like rapidly modernizing. So for example, things like WeWork, Airbnb, they're like modernizing like traditional real estate businesses like office spaces, hotel spaces, and etc. Right? So in this context, like things are becoming faster and faster, and we need like quick data on disruptions. So for example, disruptions such as natural disasters. We had like a huge bushfire season like 2019. Financial disasters happened in 2008 and subsequently in the EU as well. And now we are facing the biggest public health disaster we are seeing. So these disasters and then impact should be like felt immediately, and then we need to be able to answer like how it is affecting the market, right? So that's the question we had. How can we communicate this quickly? And as urban planners, we have a lot of experience in building dashboards on city systems, right? So that's what we wanted to see, like if we can use the knowledge we have from that in answering our research question in real estate markets. So we started building this process of like building a dashboard. So we kind of comprehensively surveyed the data sets which were available to us in terms of property market, COVID numbers, the product economic context, and also like looking at like the market sentiment of people who are involved in the market. And so we faced few difficulties in terms of like the speed of the data which we have. So when it's open source, usually the most important problem we face with like the data is not fast enough for a real-time dashboard. And also like real estate data is like much more valuable. So getting them in open format was like much more difficult. Still, like we kind of like had narrowed down like 10 different sources, and we created some indicators which gives us a feel of markets. For example, like a clearance rate is an indicator which gives you how many properties have been auctioned off successfully in a market. So that gives us like an indication of how much demand is there, right? So we have like different indicators for each one of these aspects, and then when combined, they can give us like a good look at the market. So we implemented the dashboard using microservices architecture, where like there are containers running and collecting data everywhere, and then it finally sits in a scalable service container, which kind of like can increase and decrease based on the demand. So the dashboard is available at COVID-19 dashboard at UNSW. So this we released last April. So if you can see, like the screenshot I have here is a snapshot of the real estate market in Australia in April, like end of April last year. So you can see how the house value index have been going on, and the Twitter sentiment in Twitter was like so negative around that time, and how like COVID numbers were going up. So we've been like tracking this since then, and like every week the data gets updated, and we can actually have like some really valuable insights like as we move towards the end of the year. So first thing we could see was we could precisely on a week by week basis like find the impact of the pandemic on the real estate markets, right? So you can see the onset of the pandemic initially, and then you can also see like pick out the second wave in Melbourne. So you can like the blue line is the Melbourne market and how it responded to the second wave. You can also see like the market kind of froze during the Christmas and like the UK variant. So the fresh set of restrictions happened and people just like didn't move. And also surprisingly, like the median price, like the price of the properties remained unaffected over a whole period of time. So that's one of the key insights we had. This has also around the end of the last year and end of this year, the prices actually went up. Like, so the market kind of rallied up. In terms of house value, which is like a hedonic model, which is basically like it's not just the sales value, but like how things, it's based on the property characteristics as well. So we can also see the same thing, like the pandemic slowed down the market initially. For most of last year, it behaved like a loss generating asset. But then at the end of the year, it started like rallying. And then you can also see like very, very short-term impacts as well. So this is the period around which like Adelaide had a small outbreak. You can see the red line going down. So it responds how it responds to the market. And you can see the rally at the end of the thing. So this has also been observed in disruptions in terms of floods in US as well. So usually this is caused by the financial measures introduced by the government to improve the economy. Also, in terms of like physical mobility, how people moved in the cities have changed completely, right? So we can see it from the mobility index from various companies. Like, so Apple had its own mobility index, Citymapper had its own mobility index. So what we observed is like Sydney and Melbourne were like completely different because of the second wave, and they still haven't gone back. So right, like by end of last year, they were like 50% of what they were earlier before the pandemic, and I think right now it's around like 50% as well. So it's 50-60%. And most interesting one was the market sentiment, right? So for example, when you plot like the market sentiment in terms of like Twitter and then analyzing the sentiment in the Twitter tweets which are happening around real estate, so you can actually pick out like good trends there. So one such thing is like I'm showing here is early November, there was an outbreak in Adelaide, which I mentioned earlier. So you can quickly see like how the sentiment was like predominantly negative around the time. And when Pfizer vaccine was announced and like applied for approval in USA, like there was a huge swing in like positive sentiment. So we can pick those out easily, and we can actually see them as a real-time, day-to-day movement in the markets. So that's our work with the COVID-19 and like real estate markets, and like we put all of this like in within a month. And like we've been like tracking them regularly, and which gives us like a good view of like how the market is responding to the pandemic and like how things are like going on a daily day-to-day basis. But we had like certain limitation in terms of like availability of data, and the source of data were like very hard to come by. So that's one of the main focuses we had the later part of the project, like where we wanted to get as much as data possible for describing the real estate market as is. There was also like a large part of like rental economy which we mixed, but so we recently like got a paper in review which is on Airbnbs and how they have like been impacted by the pandemic as well. And the sentiment analysis also has like a lot to be done in the future, so which we are going to be working on later. Which brings me to the future directions of research, where like we will be expanding this as a much more broader and general status monitor for the real estate market in Australia. So that's where we are heading to. And on a broader scale, we are like trying to understand the real estate market and how we can value properties accurately and like effectively for the whole market. So that's our research, and I'll open the floor for questions. And over to you, Roshni.
Much, Bala. So do we have any questions from the audience? If you'd like to just pop them into the chat or the Q&A, we would be delighted to take them to Bala. So while we're waiting for people to come in from the audience, Bala, what do you see as the key importance of, or what's the impact of the work being done to understand property prices and property valuations and how COVID might be impacting that? What impact does that understanding have for the broader society?
Yeah, so basically like that's a really good question, right? So while looking at the project, real estate as a market has always been a very slow long-term market, right? So people don't invest in real estate on a day-to-day basis. That's how it used to be. So, and it was always like focused on buyers and sellers who are like in for a long term. But that has changed, slowly changed, and like it's been acceleratedly changing now, right? So there are like new prop tech companies coming up every day. And there are like new financial instruments have been like introduced, which kind of like allows people to like buy and sell properties in a very, very different manner. So for example, REITs allow you to like buy real estate as if you'll buy like equity and shares, right? Shares and bonds. So what has happened now is like the market is moving towards a place where real estate is commodified in a way that like it happens much more shorter. Like it's still not like shares where like every minute or hour count, but like it's still in a place where like real time has changed. What real time in property market has changed. So, and also as a part of public infrastructure and public infrastructure financing, real property and property value has become like more important. So for example, most of the public infrastructure decisions happens around like how much it will improve property values in a place, like how it's going to affect those things. So this kind of like infrastructure and understanding impact on property markets specifically will help the investors, home owners, buyers, renters, so the people who are actually in the market, and also like the government agencies who are in the broader economy and infrastructure place, like so they can decide like where to put their infrastructure. So it kind of like gives you the broader stakeholders like information on the market in a short-term basis, right? So that's where like this kind of research fits in, like similar to how smart cities and smart city dashboards work for cities and like urban planners and things. So these dashboards give you like that same smart real estate or smart property for them.
The most challenging part of the process of creating this dashboard?
I would say data. So it's like data in property market is very hard to create and harvest. It's changing, and I'm like very optimistic in the future. So because like there are a lot of new innovations coming up. So for example, like the research I mentioned on Airbnb is like very promising. So we can have like a day-to-day feedback on the market, like how people are renting. So which would be like unthinkable like 15 years ago. So that's really good. So that's the challenge. Like if you can figure out that equation, like somebody can figure out the data part of it, then there is a lot of value in that.
In terms of scaling this sort of understanding, or process of the dashboard to other countries or other areas. How do you think, or what would be some priority areas for the data to enable this sort of dashboard for different countries, different areas, different economies?
Okay, so I think in terms of developed economies, so either it goes like very socially oriented, like property market, right? So for example, like Denmark, Singapore, they have like the property market is like very publicly owned and publicly directed, and places like UK, US, and Australia, like, data is not like at a premium, so you have a lot of data available. So that's kind of becomes easier to like get something done here. But the challenge is really in like developing economies where like you have to get the data. You have to create infrastructures to generate the data first. So that's where like the for example, like I know markets in Delhi and Bombay, like so they are really huge markets, but like we have no idea what's like going on in a granular level. So the people who build those infrastructure to generate and capture those data, that's where the real value is. You're on mute, Roshni.
It's so strange.
Bala, what do you see as the future of dashboards like this moving forward? A couple of years, 5, 10 years, even? What sort of insights do you think they can bring?
Personally, I think like the work we are doing in Valley Australia, like so it's kind of like bringing us to a place where we can understand the market in a much comprehensive real-time basis, which can help us make our models much more better. So for example, like as a lender and as a the government agencies, like we can have like much more confidence in like how we value properties. So that's where like the work will sit in the future, where like we'll give you like much. So I imagine like the next person who will be looking at the property market will be like sitting in a control room looking at the market like as a live thing, rather than like reading through a report. So
what about the sort of public good aspect of work like this, in terms of not only being good for decision makers in industry, in government, but also for everyday people like you and me, who might just be interested in understanding the impacts of the market on their own properties?
Yeah, so that's where the open source part of it comes in. So having something which is open, like so, this is like the Rob Kitchen's way of explaining dashboards that are an entity themselves. By giving out knowledge, they actually influence the market themselves. Like it just makes the market more transparent, right? Having information available for everyone, and it makes the market more efficient as well. So everybody knows, and like everybody knows how things going to react, and like what. So that way, like these are like very good instruments in a real estate market, like a modern real estate market, but like everything is transparent.
Bit of a lead-in, given that our next speaker works in space and Earth observation. As there are advancements in Earth observation and other space technologies, how do you think that might disrupt and transform the property market?
Yeah, so that's actually really good. So basically, like right now, we are using like a lot of remote sensing and like remote sensing data, like Earth observation data in our models, right? So for example, like the ones which we are currently looking at is like slope and views, so which are much more non-tangible elements which needed like manual valuation methodologies before, can be easily automated now. So using machine learning models. So for example, the example would be like same house in the same building, but like the window has a view of a harbor bridge, will have like double the valuation. So those things can be like picked up much more effectively with valuation models now. So that's where like the advancement like lie in. So if you have like good data on like slope, heights, 3D and all that stuff, so which makes our models much more robust.
And I don't currently have any questions from the audience coming through. Was there anything else that you'd like to talk about, Bala?
It's great to be here. Like and yeah, so I'm enjoying the conference. Like all the best for the Asia Pacific program.
Thank you so much, Bala.
Thanks, Rosh.
So I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, who is a superstar in Australia, I have to say. Professor Alan Duffy will be speaking to us about reimagining a sustainable future from space. As we've just heard a little bit from Bala, we have many insights that can come from improvements in both technology and in the way that we use data from space. So without further ado, the incredible Professor Alan Duffy.
Thank you very much. Now, I'll just do one last final check. You can see the slide. You can hear me fine.
Yep.
All right.
You're good to go.
All right. Thank you very much. So this is a great honor to speak to you all. I'm going to give you a very quick whistle tour through the latest in space that I find some of the most exciting trends in the sector and the impact that they may have in your world down here on Earth, and very much all the activities in space are to better enable Earth. And with before I launch into those details, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which my institute and indeed Swinburne campuses sit, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I want to pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, and extend those respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. We have essentially a transformative period in space technologies, and really I could articulate it as three key developments that have revolutionized, transformed the opportunities in space. That is the idea of new facilities that have come online, ever more powerful techniques applied to those facilities, and a broadening of accessibility, of standardization, of accessibility that empowers distributed communities, and an open source approach to something that perhaps even just a generation ago would have been seen as essentially in the sphere of defense, and some of the very largest primes, and everyone else would have been excluded. So these are converging trends that have, I think, created some new end user opportunities to address very significant needs, and we'll get into those by the end. Now, I can't imagine it's escaped anyone's attention that we are in something of a boom when it comes to launching of satellites, not a phrase you usually use when talking about rockets, but we now see, by the way, this is in no means an exhaustive list, but some of the most exciting providers of information from orbit with satellites from the likes of Planet. We have over 140 satellites, enough to pass over every place on Earth once a day, an extraordinary update frequency. We have new startups like Black Sky Constellation. We have the potential for real-time video from orbit with Vivid Eye. In particular, their Earth Eye satellite demonstrated this back in 2018. So imagine capturing video from what might you be able to do with that kind of information. I would say that the kind of gold standard in Earth observation is the worldview. These are, by the way, just commercial. We are not mentioning the public agencies. This is just purely commercial-driven providers. With worldview by Maxar, you can get up to 30 centimeter resolution, for example. But even they have begun to explore, rather than these single large, almost $1 billion satellites, instead to deploy a swarm of satellites, just like the other newer competitors like Planet Labs. And with those, example in this case being Legion, the entire cost for Legion is less than the cost for just one of the Worldview satellites. So just an extraordinary time in which the number of satellites up there is increasing, but so too are the types. We also now have synthetic aperture radar constellations by ISI, for example, a new startup. So these are able to provide multi-wavelength coverage of the entire world with SAR, adding the ability to discern height information anywhere from tens of centimeters to potentially even millimeters with interferometric SAR. So just an extraordinary time of capabilities that are up there. Now, all of that would be naught for naught if there weren't the advanced techniques to explore the data. One particular favorite of mine is super resolution AI. So this is where you enhance the image either through stacking in time or stacking in color, assuming some model that connects the different bands of color, or even just one shot super resolution, as some wonderful work by one of my team, Jack White, demonstrated. And essentially this is, the top row is the degraded image, and the bottom is the image of the car park, more clearly identifiable after reconstruction. And essentially from left to right is increasing signal to noise. And it's fair to say that the last three bottom images are reasonably similar. In other words, super resolving AI can do a lot to enhance the imagery and make easier the analysis therein. Even with these cheaper, smaller satellites, we're getting similar performance to the very large satellites of old. As I mentioned, there's multi-wavelength, but there's also SAR. So the best value, as it were, for mapping the surface of the Earth and understanding it better is in the data fusion of these two very rich data sets, in particular in some work by my colleague Kai Xing, demonstrating the ability to rapidly and entirely automatically detect changes in, for example, river flows or with flooding events, getting exquisitely detailed and highly reliable maps essentially automatically. We also can, well, essentially spot animals from space. In this example is wonderful work funded by Microsoft. This is object identification. It can be of cars, it can be people, homes, houses, classification, all of these rich data sets being provided. It's just everyone loves a shot of an elephant, so this is why this is the example. But one can imagine how powerful the combination of all of these satellites with these new techniques being employed through machine learning object identification techniques to just gain those insights and census as well as classification of ground. These are the kind of tools that are now available. And in particular, they're available to all through platforms like the Open Data Cube. And I think it's this final piece where the CSIRO, Geoscience Australia, NCI, NASA, GEOS, the US Geological Surveys, you name it, everyone's getting involved, building in the tools to the Open Data Cube. So advances in analysis are built upon this platform and growing capability and capacity in time, but are not exclusionary. And I think that's such a vastly exciting trend. We're seeing the Digital Earth Australia model essentially bringing together of all of these data sets. And so successful was it that we now have the African Regional Data Cube. Again, very similar concept of just pulling in all of these rich data sets and trying to provide them to the organizations, companies, and consumers on the ground to try to influence and inform. So as I mentioned, all of these trends in the techniques, the accessibility, the facilities are going in a very exciting direction, and they're all advancing and making possible some extraordinary end user needs. I'll just give some examples to get you thinking about the ways which you might be able to use this data if you're not already actively doing so. The first and I think perhaps painfully obvious case here in Australia is for bushfire. And this is a wonderful image from Maxar where we see in the optical, the smoke in the left completely obscures the fire, but then we switch to infrared, I believe it's shortwave for this particular example, and you can clearly see those hotspots. You can clearly see the burning fire regions. Early detection of bushfire from space is not just feasible, it is an imperative, and it is happening in Australia with projects like Fire Shield. We also, of course, can quickly identify flooding regions, any natural disaster that changes the landscape. Satellite imagery is a potentially powerful tool, and this is a all too recently painful experience where the East Coast in Australia was flooded. Some really awful damage got caused, but within hours, essentially, Sentinel-1 was providing updated imagery to help emergency services on the ground. Moreover, we've been hearing about the dashboard just before. More generally, space is just a way to provide essentially a framework to place local information. We talk about 3D. Well, of course, you can do this in 4D as you have information arriving and being stored over time in, for example, the Open Data Cube, and this wonderful example of the New South Wales spatial digital twins, which can help in the planning in cities. You can begin to model out scenarios. We've heard about how that might impact prices. Well, in this particular example, it means we can visualize a project before it starts and plan and predict for future outcomes. It's just an incredibly exciting trend that I see, and would hope ultimately all cities, and indeed we just have essentially the digital Earth, and it be truly a digital twin of our planet, where we have this rich data set accessible to all. And now on a final example, I think is perhaps the most powerful use or most compelling use of space, and that is to empower communities. And in particular, that is a community group that's often marginalized. The fastest growing form of habitation in the world are slums. These unmapped extensions to existing cities are growing at phenomenal rates. We have an example in Dhaka, which is adding 1.5 million people per year in these slums. Now we can use satellite imagery combined with powerful AI techniques, which I've been describing before, to essentially automatically map these slums. And this is a critical use of that imagery. We can use local ancillary data sets on the ground, as an example undertaken here in Kenya, to further improve the accuracy of those maps. And why is it so important that we map out these otherwise unmapped regions? Well, as the wonderful example of the Muungano wa Wananchi effort, some 20-year effort to map the slums, providing essentially registration of the people and the properties in these regions. And because they are now mapped, they're officially acknowledged by the state then must provide the services, must provide the support for those regions, because they can no longer be ignored, because they're unofficial, but now they are truly mapped. So that's the incredible power that I see satellite providing, for all of the reasons I've mentioned before. This is just one example, but what a powerful, life-changing experience with generational impact. Now, if any of this has caught your attention, and perhaps you want to learn more about the very rapidly changing world of space technology, very short plug for my own university's efforts therein. We have co-majors in undergrad. Perhaps you're already a professional, or even a postgrad, you don't want to do that kind of undertaking. Well, we have micro-credentials just to get you up to speed and translate your knowledge into the space domain. If you're more into astronomy and space science, we also do PhDs in astronomy. I have a number of very successful PhD students, and I've showed you some of their work already. So please get in touch on any of those. And finally, and wishing my best of luck to the Swinburne Youth Space Innovation Challenge. 6 schools are competing in Australia's first and only student-led, designed and launched mission to the International Space Station. I can't wait to see what projects and experiments they create in this unique 10-week challenge. But if you want to learn more, please email Rebecca Allen at swin.edu.au. Perhaps you might even want to become a mentor, or even enter yourself. And with that, I will stop. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Alan. That was fantastic. It never ceases to amaze me, the rapid rate at which technology is advancing and the sheer impact that humanity can have, for good and evil, unfortunately, through these sorts of, advancements.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's worth bearing in mind, these are all dual-use technologies in some sense. As you say, it could be used for good or bad. But I think what's different today is that the level of resources required to use these powerful technologies and techniques is diminishing and becoming sufficiently low that concerned citizens can now access these powerful tools, that they can begin to advocate for local issues. They can essentially monitor the big players in the way that the big players monitored all of us in the past, and use those information for their own benefit. I really think this is a transformative moment that empowers people around the world to advocate for a more sustainable planet, and to be able to track as qualitatively and quantitatively, thanks to a lot of the AI techniques, these kinds of measures. I think that's an incredibly exciting, very disruptive idea. And we're really only just at the start of this. These initiatives I'm talking about are essentially all 2 years old, 3 years old at most. This stuff is really exciting, very could be really quite transformative and revolutionary. And I think because most of the most successful activities are open source in nature, we learn from one another and we empower one another, and we keep getting better with the help of each other. And I think that's an exciting future.
Yes, and we've got Priya Gandhi speaking up next about the disruptions that are happening and how climate change is, it may not be massive at the moment, but it is growing and becoming an increasingly large concern. And as we move closer to 2030, it's going to become even more pressing. We've seen that the action that humanity can take when it comes to COVID-19 to ramp up and get things organized and take action. How do you think that these technologies that we have from space will make things more transparent when it comes to climate change and climate action?
So there's a sense of space allowing us to better handle the onset of climate change, and climate change, unfortunately, will be disruptive. Let's try to limit that, but it is going to have a massive impact in the short and medium term, sadly. I think that's now locked in. Space will be critical to both emergency services with rapidly changing events, but bushfire is going to become far more common, sadly, as one example. But it's also about the ability to provide independent monitoring. For example, reforestation efforts can be easily mapped from space, and that's an incredibly powerful data point to have, when in years gone by you would actually just have to have people sent there to count trees, essentially just to check that things weren't going awry. We could imagine fisheries being protected against illegal fishery, for example, one of the key means of delivering the UN Sustainable Development Goals in reducing world hunger. So there are many instances where space will play a supporting role. It may even play perhaps one of the leading roles in these activities. But I think we can only realize that benefit and the ability to be prepared for the climate change challenges that are coming by developing up the tools and distributing those tools, so as many people can answer the specific questions and needs that they have. These are global monitoring satellites. They're able to watch everything essentially, and we can't possibly anticipate all the uses that they might find. So I think it's really important. That's why it's very exciting. We're seeing these open source platforms being developed so that we don't have prescribed questions that can be asked, because they're often not the best questions or end user needs that can be addressed. So I think that's why this is such an exciting and disruptive time, because essentially the tools are being given to the world, and we'll see what the world population can do with them. But I think addressing local challenges and climate change abatement efforts will be one of the uses against this globally impactful climate change event. But again, it's very much going to be felt on the local scale, and that's where these kinds of satellites can help.
Many of us, when we think of space, we think of the landing on the moon or rockets going to Mars. Perhaps they're not rockets anyway. The workforce that we're going to need in order to develop and get the space industry going to its full capacity in Australia and around the world, it's not going to be from people necessarily directly entering from university, studying, and then entering the workforce. What role do programs like the micro-credentials at Swinburne offer to people who might have experience in other industries, such as many of our surveyors, who might want to skill up to be able to reinvent the direction of their career moving forward?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question, and you're absolutely right. We're having, the Australian Space Agency, its target, and very much is on its way for this, is to grow the sector 3 times over in Australia, the space sector, and see 20,000 extra jobs created by the end of this decade. And that is not going to be matched by the universities pumping out space engineering grads of some kind. So it is going to be a retraining of the existing workforce. And that's where the micro-credentials provide the space context for your deep domain expertise to be realized within. And I think that that's an appropriate way to tackle this new opportunity, because, you know, there's the phrase, it's rocket science. Well, okay, yes, it can be hard to launch into space, but realistically, unless you're actually building rockets, in most instances, the fact that this information is coming from space, or there's a space aspect to the challenge, that doesn't really make it that much harder beyond some additional retraining to operate within that environment. What you're going to, in practice, be doing as a role or to serve as an end user need is going to essentially be your core expertise, but with a little bit of a space flavor to it. So I think that these tools, as I keep referring to them, are just have democratized the access to this information and have provided a platform where we don't need people to undertake a 4-year degree to be able to understand how to use the data from space. Essentially, the platform together with a micro-credential is enough to get you there. And now you can use your deep domain expertise to understand the actual challenge and address it. For example, with the aspect of the slums, the whole space activity is just one small aspect that makes that more efficient and more successful and more scalable. But all of the on the ground work and all of the actions and activities that flow from that, they don't really require a space degree at that point, right? They require everyone else to have their existing core background and expertise. But again, to realize the use of space, there is a little bit of retraining required. But as you say, I think it is to address that coming workforce challenge, it is more about the retraining of existing professionals and using their hard-won, highly valuable domain expertise, but with a small bit of a space flavor. And I'm biased, I'm going to say the space flavor makes it really exciting, but it is not rocket science at the end of the day. And I think that should be very encouraging to us all, that to get involved in this new activity.
I really enjoyed your presentation as well, and it's been such a pleasure to have you present with us, Alan.
Thank you so much for having me, Roshni.
And so I'd like to introduce now Priya Gandhi, who works for Atelier 10. She is a building engineer who specializes in sustainability. As we know, when it comes to surveying, the land rights and administration are complemented by the buildings that we put on them. And Priya will be speaking with us today about how climate change is something that will affect the way that we work as surveyors and geospatial professionals now and moving into the future. So Priya, without further ado, welcome.
Thanks so much, Roshni, and thanks for having me today. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and I think my presentation is going to be changing tack a little bit. I don't have any research to share with you, but I do want to talk about some of my experiences in sustainability and things that you can do in your own career. So so my talk is on this is a climate emergency, and I think it's a good segue from what Alan was talking about. And next slide, please, Roshni. So I just a little bit about me first, because I have such I think a different background from those of you attending. But I grew up in the beautiful Rocky Mountains in the U.S., about 30 minutes away from the best skiing on earth. My parents were passionate about national park family vacations, and I will admit that I was kind of an indoor kid, but still my early exposure to all of those amazing parks that are in the Western U.S. and Canada really shaped who I am today. And that's someone who really cares about sustainability, people, and equity. So now I'm in Melbourne, Australia, and I work in the built environment. And I like to kind of say that I make buildings better for people and the planet, basically. So I guess more specifically, I'm an associate with the sustainability consulting firm called Atelier 10. We're headquartered in London. We've got offices all around the world, and we work on projects from single buildings to master plans across campuses. I'm also the vice president of ABIPSA Australasia, which is an organization that's dedicated to using simulation and analysis to improve the environment. And I'm also active with Australian Engineers Declare, which I'll touch on a little bit later. And then lastly, I'm part of Homeward Bound, which is a global leadership initiative of women in STEM. That's science, technology, engineering, maths, and medicine, focused on creating a more sustainable and equitable world. And then just before we jump into the rest of my presentation, just thought I'd explain this picture a little bit because I'm a bit of a craft nerd. And this photo was taken last year during the extreme lockdowns in Melbourne. I crocheted a scarf that was based on the average global temperature of the past 100 years. So starting at the top, we've got 1919, and then at the bottom was the last data that I had was 2019. So even though I've been working in sustainability for about a decade, and I've always been really passionate about climate, environment, and this kind of thing, but even so, just crocheting this scarf was a huge eye opener. Just, you know, it was so, I mean, you can see just in the scarf, there's so many rows of blue, and then it's all of a sudden it gets to orange and red, and it just really underscored again the importance of climate action. So, next slide, please, Roshni. So I wanted to do a quick poll. Now that you know a little bit about me, it would be great to know a little bit about you. So it's just I think it's just like 4 questions, just so I can get a sense of where you're all coming from and yeah, what you do around sustainability.
Those of you who haven't used Mentimeter before, if you go to www.menti.com on your phone or on your computer and type in the code 75242077, you'll be able to enter in the word for where you live right now, and this will come up to form a word cloud on the screen.
Fellow Melbourneian. That's great. Oh, cool. Netherlands.
Give people another minute or so. If you have trouble at all, you can go to the chat and the code will be available for you there. www.menti.com, MENTI.com, and the code is 75242077.
Oh, wow. Didn't expect so many Europeans to join, so that's great.
We'll give it another maybe 10 seconds or so.
I see someone type Nigeria in the chat. Yeah, that's great.
Feel free to enter directly into the chat if that is easier for you, if you are having any technology issues.
Okay. So Roshni, should we go to the next question? We've got a good sense. It's impressively global crowd. That's great.
Now is, what do you do? You'll notice that there's 2 spots for you to enter in acknowledgement that some of us might be students who are working at the same time. So please feel free to enter in 1 or 2 things about how what you do at the moment professionally.
Great. So engineering, surveying, data analysis, academia. Like there's quite a wide range, folks. That's great. And yeah, I guess I acknowledge that I'm sure many of you wear many different hats in what you're doing. So it's yeah, it's great. Awesome. Great. And then just there's just I think 3 more quicker little polls we can jump to. So I just want to get a sense of how many of you take any kind of action in your personal life to address climate change. So this could be anything from using your own bags, or addressing your diet, or maybe you ride your bike to work or something like that. Awesome. This is really exciting to see. It's okay if you don't yet. I know it can be overwhelming. Yeah. Great. And then the next question is, are you taking any action in your professional life to address climate change? Is there anything that you're doing, whether it's something that your university is doing, your research is doing, is it or projects you're working on, whatever it is there something in there that's related to climate change, sustainability, that kind of thing? So this is just kind of helping me understand kind of where you all are at. So I know it can sometimes be hard to translate those kinds of personal actions into professional. So yeah, it's great to see that so many of you are taking some of those challenges on in your professional life. So maybe another couple seconds, and then go to the last question. So, great. And then yeah, last question. Just curious if you know anything about your country and their how they're tracking towards the Paris Agreement, or whether you've even heard of the Paris Agreement, which is totally fine if you haven't. Right, so a range of responses. Some folks don't know what it is, which is, yeah, we'll be talking about that in a moment. Yeah, it can feel really big picture, and so how do you scale it down to yourself? And then we'll talk about that as well. Cool. Give me another couple seconds, and then yeah. Great, awesome, cool. Well, it's good to see that a lot of you have heard of the Paris Agreement, and whether you know kind of exactly what your country's doing, that's totally fine. I'll be giving some resources on where you can find that out. So I wanted to start off with a little story. So in June of 1802, a German geographer named Alexander von Humboldt was leading an expedition up a volcano in modern-day Ecuador. This is a 6,000 meter tall volcano called Chimborazo. It's almost right on top of the equator, so the variety of climates on its slope stretches from grasslands all the way up to glaciers. And as Humboldt and his team ascended the volcano, every so often they would stop, take their elevation, and document what plant species they were finding. And they did this every so often as they went up. So he took all of this information and he created this really beautiful sketch, artistic interpretation of his data. Documenting this is the I think this is Chimborazo and another volcano next door, and documenting just all the species that he found going all the way up. And so the thing that I find really interesting about Alexander von Humboldt is that he wasn't just a geographer. He was a polymath, so that's someone who's an expert in many different fields. And he spent years trekking around South America, making all kinds of connections between all these different fields that he knew about. And honestly, these connections were centuries ahead of his time. So he was talking about deforestation, agricultural monocultures, pollution from the emerging industrial revolution, and how all these things were degrading the environment and how they would negatively impact us as humans eventually. He was also a gifted communicator, and he wrote and he spoke to the general public as well as scientists, and he even gave free lectures. This is this early 1800s, they were open to men and women. So actually providing access to information to people that normally wouldn't have that. And so I guess this brings me to what does this have to do with us today? Well, about a little over 200 years after Humboldt went up Chimborazo, scientists actually recreated his expedition to see how things changed since the very early days of the Industrial Revolution. So remember, this is early 1800s. That's really before human-led climate change really got kicked off. And in this research, they found that plant species had moved up the volcano from between 200 to 500 meters, kind of depending on the species. So that's a pretty big shift and a pretty impressive conclusion to make, that in that 200 years we've got this documented expedition, and here's how we can recreate it. So it's pretty incredible that we're able to use this data in this way. Next slide, please. So coming back to the present day, I'm sure many of you have seen this political cartoon. I know it was making the rounds quite a lot last year during, I think, one of the first COVID wave. We're all talking about initially flattening the curve. That COVID-19 is this tidal wave, but there's a recession that's going to be even bigger, and we think COVID's bad. What about the recession? Next slide, Roshni. And the addendum to this, that you maybe have seen this one, which I think originally was just somebody online with Photoshop and the cartoon, saying, well, if you think COVID's bad, recession's bad, wait until climate change hits us for real. And next slide. And that brings me back to the title of my talk, that we're in a climate emergency, and this is a picture of me from the September 2019 climate strike in Melbourne. This slogan that I found online, I thought it was very clever. Little did I know that 2020 would really come true. And I want to say, even though I know I'm showing you a picture of me at a climate march, as an activist, but I wouldn't have identified, I don't think, as an activist even just a few years ago. I attended my first march, I think, maybe 4 years ago. But I've really come to realize, as someone who's been working in sustainability for about a decade, it can feel so overwhelming, just the scale of this challenge that we're tackling. But taking action, that's the power that I have, and that's the power that you have. And that's, so I think it's really great, going back to that poll that we did, that so many of you are taking actions in your personal and professional life, because we all need to do something about it. Next slide, please. And this brings me to that, the importance of collective action. So we're all doing things in our individual, on an individual level. We can do things at work. And then there's global action that's needed. And so in 2015, the Paris Agreement was signed by almost 200 countries committing to action on climate change. Next slide. The big goal of the Paris Agreement that everyone talks about is about limiting global temperature rise to no more than 1.5 degrees by 2100. The other pillars of the Paris Agreement are that countries will be updating their commitments every 5 years, and that we will be providing finance to developing countries, because as I'm sure we're all aware that the blame for climate change is not equal among countries, and the developed countries that have contributed the most really should be doing the most to help mitigate it. So that's a really important one. Next slide. So for those of you that are that don't know where your country stands in terms of, has your country signed the Paris Agreement, and what are your targets and how are you tracking against it, I highly encourage you to look at this this particular website called the Climate Action Tracker. Great resource. It doesn't have every single country that's committed, but it's got quite a lot of them. And recently, this is just a screenshot I took the other day, because now we're about 5 years out from the Paris Agreement. Countries have updated their targets, in some instances to be stronger. So Japan and China, for instance, have put in more stringent targets. Unfortunately, there are countries like Australia and New Zealand that haven't been proposing better targets. And I know personally, just in Australia, that our existing targets aren't so great. And there's definitely some work that needs to be done to push our government to really take this more seriously. Next slide. So, big question is always, what can you do So clearly many of you are already doing something, so that's great. And I think the important thing is to acknowledge that we all have a responsibility. Oh, that's fine, you can go to the next slide. And it's also really important to join a community. So I mentioned that I'm part of Australian Engineers Declare, and this is a group that is dedicated to connecting people and furthering climate action within the engineering discipline. There are other Declare movements. I know in Australia there's Architects Declare, Planners Declare, landscape architects, builders. I mean, being in the built environment, I'm more familiar with the ones that are around buildings. But there are lots of other organizations, whether they're called Declare or something else. And I really recommend that you reach out to those organizations, get involved, join a community, because, as I said, this is a group effort, and it's better to do this with friends. Next slide. And then next, I just want to, I guess, reassure that we have this really big challenge. We can, there's a lot of resources out there, and so it's not all doom and gloom. And Alan mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, and I highly, highly encourage you to go look on the UN's website if you're not familiar with these goals, and really dive into them, because there's a lot behind each of these goals with specific targets and actions and advice and recommendations on how you can localize them to your world, to your work and your context, how to apply them. I think it's really important. This is just one example. There's lots of other resources out there. Next slide. And as you're learning about things, make sure you share that information. Talk to your peers, talk to your coworkers, your bosses, your university, your research institution, your firm, wherever you're working. Talk to them about what you're finding out, why it's important. Ask questions, find out, do you know if your university or your company has a sustainability plan? Do they have, is there a 5-year plan, 10-year plan? What are they doing? What action are they taking? What about the projects you're on? Do they have targets set for achieving certain emissions reductions or water savings or whatever it is? Like why not if they don't have them? And I know I've been working primarily in private industry, and money is always that bottom line, but there are a lot of arguments around mitigating the risk due to climate change is a better financial bet. So there are ways to kind of work that in and get people who maybe don't care intrinsically about climate change to care because they care about that bottom line. And it's about finding that reason. And that's why sharing information and joining those communities will help you get the right tools in your belt to make this happen in your work. Next slide. And I just wanted to also note that it's really important as you're going along to celebrate your achievements, talk about your successes. I love hearing about it when, my coworkers or my colleagues, family, friends, whenever they've done something really great. It's always good. I feel like it lifts you up, it lifts all of us up. And it's so important, especially with the scale of the challenge. We have to remember that we are making a difference. That's just so important. And then next slide, please. I just want to circle back to Humboldt and just kind of mention that we're so lucky that we live in this age of seemingly endless information. It's so easy for us to learn about other disciplines. Humboldt had to travel the world, spent decades collecting information. It was so dangerous. He was also quite privileged to have the funding and the time and everything to do this. Especially at a time when most people probably didn't even leave the town where they were born. And he did all this. He showed us how important it is to understand how interconnected the world is. And really, we can all be that. We can all be, versions of Alexander Humboldt. We can all be interdisciplinary, make those connections. And really, to take meaningful climate action, we all need to be interdisciplinary. So that's what I challenge you to do. And I think what Alan and Roshni were talking about just before about, needing folks in other disciplines to get some additional training and switch around to other fields. That's so important, because we all having that different background will give us different perspectives, find those links and connections and innovations, and really go out there and make a difference. So yeah, thanks so much. Next slide, just the last slide. So yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Priya. That was incredible. So I just wanted to ask you one quick question before we go to our parallel streams. In terms of climate change, as we head towards 2030, things are supposed to get pretty dire. What do you think would be some small things that people can do either in their personal or professional lives to feel more of a sense of hope that they're doing something positive to lessen the problem?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm definitely frequently overcome with these feelings of, oh my gosh, we have so much to do, and I think it's just important to do something. So if in your personal life there's an action that you can take, it's going to be different for everyone. So for example, I decided a couple years ago that I was going to go vegan, and I understand that's not a decision that is for everyone, but for me that seemed right, and I thought, well, this is something that I can do. There are other things that are harder for me to do. For example, I'm from the US, but I live in Australia, so giving up flying entirely, that's not really an option, or else I'll never see my family again. But I can do these other things, and I think it's finding that action that works for you and recognizing it might not always be easy, but there, eventually, like now, it's being vegan is really not a big deal. Like I used to love meat, like it was a really, I never thought I would go vegan. So it's not, some of it about maybe making some sacrifices, but acknowledging that there's a different solution for everyone. And then when it comes to your professional life, I think it's really asking those questions and talking to your colleagues and your bosses and just asking, why aren't we doing this? Or if we're doing this, can we do more? And being that advocate, I really think that, taking action is really empowering and can help fight that feeling of hopelessness. I think that can be really easy to get to in the face of that tidal wave of climate change. So yeah, I would definitely want, this is a hopeful message that we really can make a difference, and we do need to buckle down and get to it in the next 9 years, especially. And I think we can, and we all need to take responsibility, and we can all achieve this.
So the next part of our sessions is going to occur in the actual session. We'll have parallel streams, a technical stream and a professional development stream. So what I'll ask you to do is we're currently in the stage area of the conference. Along the left-hand side panel of your interface for this conference, you'll see a number of little buttons. One of them says Sessions. If you click on the Sessions page, it will take you to a platform where you're able to then select whether you'd like to attend the professional development stream or the technical stream. So we'll now wrap up our activities in the stage and we'll jump over to the sessions area. I'll see you there.